Like Punk Never Happened was, originally it was something that Paul Weller said to Neil Tennant in an interview about, he was describing watching Spandau Ballet going to a concert at Wembley Arena in limousines in their Yohji Yamamoto clothes and dripping with diamonds or whatever, and he went, it was as though Punk had never happened. And Neil kind of brought this back, thought it was funny, and it started getting used around the Smash Hits office, like Punk Never Happened, coined as such by Neil, became a phrase that was applied to any kind of picture of rock and roll excess. Look at that, it's like Punk Never Happened. And it just became one of the jokes that reverberated around Smash Hits and landed in the pages. And existed as such until I was some way into writing Like Punk Never Happened, the book, which was originally called something else. We'd called it Pop Music when we first sold the thing, trying to make it sound definitive and all embracing, but it was a bit of a dry title, and one day while I was sitting working on one of the early chapters, it just came into my head, Like Punk Never Happened. It not only had a bit more resonance than the original title, but it also kind of embodied a paradox which was at the heart of my argument, which was the argument of the book, which was that although the way the new pop worked out looked as though punk had never happened, it looked like it was really excessive, etc. If punk hadn't happened, then new pop wouldn't have happened either. The way in which punk opened up the music industry, the way in which it made business kind of accessible to musicians somehow. It was possible for musicians to participate in the business side of their careers after punk. That was one of the main effects it had. All that was very much the foundation of the new pop, really. So Like Punk Never Happened became, as a title, became an interesting way of spinning my argument, basically. Well, it came to a point where I realised I wasn't going to be working at Smash Hits forever. The team I was working with was kind of going to break up. Different people were going to do different things. And I decided I wanted to write a book to sum up the experience. Neil Tennant and I were always hatching ideas for books, and we basically discussed this. And it seemed the best way to do it was to write a book about the phenomenon in general, but spin it around the story of one particular group. So the book was structured like that, with the story of Culture Club told in kind of episodes arranged chronologically, but each one chosen because it would spin off into the topic of that chapter. So you'd get another installment in the story of Culture Club, but that would lead into reflections about things like money, sex, blah, blah, blah. These were the topics of the book. That's how it was structured. Culture Club were chosen partly because at that point I knew them very well. They were at the height of their fame when we were selling the book in the middle of the 1984. George was obviously one of the more interesting characters to come out of that phenomenon. He was always perplexing, even to the people who knew him. And for all those reasons, that's why it was built around Culture Club. The intriguing thing, the astonishing thing, was how completely he fell from grace in the course of me writing the book. I mean, that would have seemed inconceivable in 1984 when we were coming to Faber with our proposal. I think Neil sat at one marketing meeting with Faber saying, like, you can be confident that, you know, the Culture Club will still be famous for years to come, and at the time that seemed like gospel truth. There was no way that wasn't going to be true. And yet, as I say at one point in the book, pop is also the sound of a bubble bursting, and his bubble well and truly burst while I was writing the book. By the time the thing came out, Culture Club were no more.
In Smash Hits language, he went down the dumper.
He went right down the dumper. He went down the dumper with a vengeance. Understanding the group and how the group worked was impossible without understanding that the relationship between John and George was at the heart of it. And as I alluded to earlier in this conversation, that kind of embodied a dynamic that was always part of British pop music, the collision of sex and ambition, basically. And so therefore I kind of had to write about it. And I was the first person to put it into print. Yeah, as soon as I did, the tabloids all kind of seized on that as their excuse to write about it for the first time. Somebody else had braved the business of actually putting it into print. And of course, George and John were furious that I had. For my part, I tried to do it as tactfully as possible. I didn't make anything out of it, really. It's buried away in the middle of a chapter where it falls in the argument. I mean, I didn't try and use that to sell the book or anything, but still got people's backs up, yeah. Well, it's funny because at the time when you do it, you've got no perspective on it really. That was just life, you know. I mean, I was in the very fun situation of like, you know, getting a phone call and, hey Dave, do you want to go to New York tomorrow or whatever? Like that was just what happened. It was a bit of a weird life in that it was a very poorly paid profession. I was living in ridiculous circumstances in London in a squat for a lot of the time. I was working for Smash Hits, and then one minute I'd be sitting in my squat in Leighton, and the next minute I'd be riding around Manhattan in a limousine with Duran Duran or something, and then you'd be dumped back into your squat at the end of the process. It was quite a schizophrenic sort of life, but it was fun. But I mean, at the time, you didn't think it was that unusual. I mean, looking back now, I don't suppose it happens that way anymore. I was lucky looking back. I caught the last great days of record company excess and largesse, where it was worth their while to send you to Los Angeles just to get a feature in Smash Hits or whatever. I don't suppose that happens now. And actually, looking back as well, there weren't that many other journalists who had that much access to the kind of bands I was writing about.